So here we have iBooks author then, and as you can see I've already got some material in here. Let me just explain a little bit about what we're looking at on the screen for the moment. First of all, this is the cover page. So at the beginning, at the top here on the left hand side, you can see A Midsummer Night's Dream. This is obviously the title. And we have the option of then creating our cover on this page. The cover can be created with text and with images. I've actually already created this as an image. So I've simply placed an image in there that I've built from Photoshop, for example, with obviously the text and the image. Built in that way. And then we have the possibility, I'm not using it myself, we have the possibility of using introductory media. So you can have some media that you put up here. So if you wanted to have an introductory video or something like that, you can place that onto the second page. So this will go when you open the book from the iBooks library on your iPad, it would normally go straight to this page. Otherwise, it'll go to the table of contents. So what we like looking at the moment is the landscape view. Now, this is a very important concept. You can, if you want to, decide that you do not want to view this in any other mode. So in other words, you can either lock it to landscape or you can lock it to portrait. And that's really a matter of choosing the right and the appropriate template, but at the same time you can configure your book to only work in one of these modes. So for example, if I bring up the inspector, I have to bring that onto the screen. So this is the inspector, and as you can see there are a number of options along the top, but if I look at the actual book itself, so here's some information about the book. We've got metadata, which of course is essential, title, author and so on, and optional keywords and comments which we could put in here. But as you can see here at the bottom, I can disable portrait orientation in this particular mode. Now that's a very important concept because actually if you wanted to just use the landscape mode, in other words disabling portrait orientation, you do have quite a lot of more control over the layout, because you can simply in a way put items on each of these pages, put them wherever you want. They will appear in that place when somebody opens your book on their iBooks library. So in other words, you don't necessarily have to be too concerned about the way that the text flows, about the way the images are anchored and so forth. If you disable portrait orientation, in other words, and just stick with the landscape orientation, then you're going to find that you have really effectively, you're freeing yourself up from quite a few of the constraints. Now, okay, so, but as you can see, I haven't disabled that because I have also got a portrait orientation as well in mine. And I'm just going to move that to one side because at the moment we're actually viewing this this book. We're viewing it in a thumbnail view in landscape mode. There are different ways of viewing it as you're authoring it. I can view it in a book outline mode. And as you can see, this gives you a little bit more information about the structure of it. We simply have under the introduction, the story, Shakespeare Portraits. Then at the same level, we have the dramatis personae. And then we have first act, and the first scene within that. Let's go back to the page thumbnails, which gives you a little bit better idea of how things are structured. So this introduction, which is in fact my title page. Within that we have the story from the Lamb's Tales, and then we have Shakespeare Portraits, the slideshow that I've shown you in the earlier episode of this screencast. Dramatis Personae, and then Act 1, and then within Act 1 we have Scene 1, and then within Scene 1 we have the subsequent pages. So I'm just going to make this slightly smaller so that you can see a typical page. In fact, if I view this so that it actually fits onto the screen, you'll get a better idea of how that's looking. next page, next page, next page, etc., etc. Okay, so that's how it looks in the landscape mode. Now I can also view this in the portrait mode. Now, as you can see, in portrait mode things change, because what happens in portrait mode is we simply get one long scrolling page for that scene. So each one of these items at this level simply gives me one scrolling page. And then, as you can see, automatically on within this margin, I get the widgets that I've created within the text. And this is a very important thing to bear in mind, is that let's go back to the earlier orientation and have a look here on this page. Now this is a widget that I've placed in this position, and this widget then appears in when we go to a different orientation. It appears in that location because it is itself floating in that position. It could be anchored in that position, but it's floating in that position. And then when we move on to this orientation, you'll see how it positions itself automatically to the left of that appropriate text. And similarly, if we move down the page here, onto this scene here, you'll see that this is also a widget. Even though it's one single image, it is actually a widget. This is what we call gallery media, except that it's one single image. Okay, let's move to Shakespeare Portraits to show you how that works. This is a widget also, but this widget, as you can see, contains multiple images. So this is the slideshow effectively. So with a slideshow, once you go beyond one image, then of course you have the option or the user has the option of scrolling through those images. Whereas these images here, this one here is a widget, but it's one single image. Now the reason that we use a widget is because if we just simply place an image, as we have placed this one, and I will now go back to this orientation, this is a single image that's placed within that text, but that single images do not then appear as images within the left-hand border in the portrait orientation. So that's something to bear in mind. If you want those images to appear with the text on the left-hand side in the margin, then you need to use a widget rather than a single image. Now, going back to a few basics though, let's just have a look again here. What we've actually got is this text is if you like, one story or one flowing text down to this point here. And this is the story by Charles and Mary Lamb, and that goes down to that position there. Now, the important thing about this is that we will need to separate our text, and we could do this within InDesign. This is the subject of the next screencast, or the next episode of this iBooks author screencast, to show you how you can extract your text from InDesign and thus make individual chapters or sections within iBooks author. Because although in InDesign we might well have all of our text threaded together, what we will ultimately need is to be able to separate these scenes out into these individual chapters, if you like. Well, we have to talk in terms of chapters or sections within iBooks author, because of course that's how it refers to them. But what we know in our play is that we have an act, and then within the act we have a number of scenes. So it's a little bit like having chapters with sections inside them. So you just have to think about that structure rather than the terminology itself. Okay.